In May 1859, Lieutenant William Hobson, conducting systematic search operations on the northwestern coast of King William Island as part of the expedition led by Francis Leopold McClintock, discovered among the stones of a semi-ruined cairn a standard printed form from the British Royal Navy, number 209. This document, made of thick paper with the watermark of the Admiralty's Supply Department, was designed specifically for recording geographical coordinates, the direction of drift, and the general condition of ships performing scientific research tasks in polar latitudes. The form's text was printed typographically in 6 European languages, including English, French, and Spanish, and was intended to be filled out by the command staff before being placed in a sealed metal cylinder for dropping into the sea or for burial at key navigational points. This artifact contained 2 handwritten entries from different times, made with ink of different chemical compositions, which is of particular interest for paleographic examination and historical diplomatics. The first entry, written in the confident hand of Commander James Fitzjames and dated the 28th of May 1847, reported that the ships Erebus and Terror had spent their first winter at Beechey Island, after which they advanced through Peel Sound and wintered in the ice off the northern tip of King William Island. The entry concluded with a standard official formula stating that under the command of Sir John Franklin, all crew members were healthy and the operational situation remained fully under control. The second entry, inscribed in a cramped, deformed handwriting in the margins and empty spaces of the same form on the 25th of April, 1848, completely contradicted the initial optimistic tone of the government report. This text, signed by Captain Francis Crozier and Commander Fitzjames, recorded a catastrophic change in the situation. The ships had been finally abandoned on the 22nd of April, after 19 months of ice captivity. Total personnel losses amounted to 24 men, including Sir John Franklin himself, who died on the 11th of June, 1847. The document reported the start of a march on foot by 105 survivors towards the Back River. It is this scrap of paper which became the only authentic written testimony left by the expedition's leadership that allows historians to reconstruct the institutional crisis and the sequential logistical collapse of the most technologically advanced polar expedition of the 19th century. Before we proceed to a detailed source analysis of this document, a study of the Admiralty's financial reports, food supply contracts, and the results of modern underwater archaeological research, I ask you to subscribe to our channel. Your subscription, regular comments, and ratings contribute to the development of science broadcasting based exclusively on verified archival materials, and allow us to continue the large-scale work of deconstructing historical myths from the standpoint of strict academic realism and the material archaeology of power. To fully understand the hidden mechanisms that led to the dispatch of the 1845 expedition, it is necessary to analyze in detail the domestic, political, and economic situation in Great Britain in the mid-19th century. Following the end of the Napoleonic Wars, the Royal Navy found itself in a period of prolonged peace, which led to reduced operational budgets and the need to justify colossal expenditures before Parliament. Sir John Barrow, who held the position of Second Secretary of the Admiralty for several decades, transformed polar exploration into a key ideological and bureaucratic project for the department. The discovery of the Northwest Passage, a sea route from the Atlantic to the Pacific through the Arctic, was viewed not only as an important cartographic task, but also as a crucial geopolitical imperative. The British Crown sought to secure exclusive rights to this strategic corridor, anticipating potential expansion by the Russian Empire in Alaska and the United States of America in the northern part of the continent. The Admiralty's financial records for 1843 and 1844 demonstrate that the department was prepared to invest unprecedented sums in modernizing the ships to guarantee the venture's success and thereby strengthen the ministry's prestige in the eyes of Robert Peel's government. The corporate structure of the Navy required a large-scale demonstration of triumph in peacetime, which predetermined the ambitious and uncompromising nature of the planned campaign. The social hierarchy and selection of the expedition's command structure reflected the internal compromises and class-based patronage characteristic of the Victorian state machinery. The choice of Sir John Franklin for the role of expedition leader was the result of a complex balance of power within the Admiralty. At the time of his appointment, Franklin was 59 years old, overweight, and in poor health, and his previous administrative service as Lieutenant Governor of Van Diemen's Land had ended in a public scandal and his removal from office. His appointment as head of the Arctic mission was intended as an act of political rehabilitation for the veteran. Second in the command structure was Captain Francis Crozier, commander of the HMS Terror. Crozier possessed unparalleled practical experience sailing in extreme latitudes, having taken part in 3 polar expeditions by William Edward Parry and the 4-year Antarctic campaign of James Clark Ross. However, his career advancement was hindered by his Irish origin and lack of aristocratic connections in the upper echelons of London society. The third influential figure was Commander James Fitzjames, appointed to the HMS Erebus through the personal patronage of Sir John Barrow. Fitzjames was a typical representative of the young military elite, ambitious and prone to romanticizing naval service, but lacking any real experience navigating pack ice. This latent social dualism and the difference in approaches between the practical Crozier and the favorite Fitzjames created underlying risks for coordinating actions in a crisis. The recruitment of the rank and file was conducted on a strictly voluntary basis. Sailors were offered wages significantly higher than the standard rates in the commercial and military fleets, along with guaranteed payments to their families for 2 years in advance, which allowed for the crews to be staffed with experienced specialists, their total number after the final inspection being 129 men. The technical specifications of the ships Erebus and Terror demonstrated the absolute faith of Victorian engineers in the triumph of the Industrial Revolution over the forces of nature. Both vessels were initially designed as bomb ships, which meant they had an extremely robust wooden frame capable of withstanding the recoil from firing heavy mortars. For the Arctic mission, their hulls underwent deep structural modernization at the shipyards in Woolwich and Chatham. The internal bulkheads were reinforced with additional oak beams, and the bow was protected with massive metal plates up to 1/3 of an inch thick to minimize damage from collisions with ice. For the first time in the history of polar exploration, the ships were fitted with steam engines dismantled from locomotives of the London and Greenwich Railway. Their adaptation required complex engineering redesign. The propellers and rudders were designed to be retracted into special internal shafts in case of ice pressure. The power of each engine was about 25 horsepower, which, under optimal conditions, allowed the ships to achieve an autonomous speed of up to 4 knots. The living decks were equipped with a revolutionary central heating system, consisting of a boiler and a network of copper pipes through which hot water circulated, intended to prevent dampness and mold. However, as supply records indicate, this complex infrastructure required a huge consumption of coal. Each vessel could carry no more than 90 tons of fuel, which, in the event of a prolonged entrapment in the ice, placed the crews in absolute dependence on strict energy consumption limits and deprived them of the ability to use steam for extended periods to break through ice jams. The central element of the expedition's life support system, designed for 3 years of complete autonomy in the Arctic desert, was the food supply, a significant part of which consisted of meat and vegetable canned goods, innovative for their time, in tin containers. Archival materials from the Admiralty's Procurement Commission indicate that in late 1844, an open tender was announced for the supply of over 8,000 cans of preserved goods. The contract was awarded to entrepreneur Stefan Goldner, who offered dumping prices, significantly below the market proposals of the Navy's traditional suppliers. Due to the tight deadlines set by the department's leadership, who were eager to dispatch the ships in the spring of 1845, Goldner's production facilities in Malden operated in around-the-clock emergency mode. The technological regulations for sterilizing and sealing the cans were grossly violated. To speed up the process of assembling the tin containers, workers used crude lead solder, applying it carelessly and in excessive quantities. Documents from the Portsmouth Supply Depot record that the acceptance of the finished products was superficial, without conducting random chemical or bacteriological analysis of the can's contents. As a result of this negligence, the lead alloy flowed freely onto the inner walls of the containers during soldering, entering into a long-term chemical reaction with the fats and acids of the meat ration. Thus, the basic logistical infrastructure of nutrition contained a hidden defect from the outset, which became the catalyst for the massive somatic and mental deterioration of the crews. On the 19th of May, 1845, the ships Erebus and Terror departed from their moorings at Greenhithe, beginning their movement north. During the first stage, transport support was provided by the auxiliary vessel Barretto Jr., which carried additional consignments of coal, fresh meat, and Quartermaster stores. In July of 1845, in Disco Bay on the western coast of Greenland, the final transshipment of cargo was carried out. From Franklin's archival reports, it follows that at this stage, 5 crew members were deemed unfit for further service due to their state of health by a medical commission and sent back to Great Britain aboard a transport ship, which fixed the final numerical strength of the expedition at 129 men. The last documented contact with the vessels by European sailors occurred on the 26th of July, 1845, in the waters of Baffin Bay. The captains of the whaling vessels Prince of Wales and Enterprise recorded the Erebus and Terror moored to a massive ice floe, awaiting favorable navigational conditions for entering Lancaster Sound. At this stage, the official flow of documents, letters, and reports to the Admiralty ceased. Further verification of the chronology of events relies exclusively on the methods of material archaeology, exhumation examinations, and critical comparison of data from later search parties. According to physical evidence discovered by the search parties of Erasmus Ominy and William Penny in 1850 on Beechey Island, the expedition spent the first winter of 1845 to 1846 under conditions of strict adherence to military regulations. Extensive shore facilities were deployed on the island: a wooden structure for storing supplies, a blacksmith's forge, a shooting range for marksmanship training, and a system of observation posts. However, it is precisely during this period that the first 3 cases of the cessation of existence of crew members are recorded. The graves of stoker John Torrington, sailor John Hartnell, and private of the Royal Marines William Brain became the first material indicators of a hidden systemic crisis. In 1984 to 1986, a group of Canadian anthropologists, led by Professor Owen Beattie, conducted an official exhumation and pathological examination of these bodies, preserved in permafrost in ideal condition. The results of spectral analysis of hair and soft tissues showed a colossal level of lead concentration, many times exceeding all permissible medical norms.
Chronic lead intoxication,
Developed as a result of the constant consumption of canned goods from defective batches by Goldner, led to a sharp decline in immunity, severe disorders of the gastrointestinal tract, and suppression of hematopoietic function. The immediate cause of death for all three sailors was acute pulmonary diseases, in particular tuberculosis and pneumonia, which developed against a background of somatic exhaustion of the body, refuting earlier assumptions about the prosperous nature of the first wintering. In the summer of 1846, after a partial breakup of the ice cover, Sir John Franklin made the decision to steer the ships south through Peel Sound, following the Admiralty's directive to seek a passage to the south of the latitude of Barrow Island. Based on an analysis of the surviving navigational marks, it has been established that the vessels successfully rounded the western coast of King William Island. However, this maneuver proved to be a fatal tactical error. This region is under the constant influence of massive pack ice descending from the Arctic basin through the McClintock Channel. This ice, of immense thickness and density, barely melts during the short polar summer. On September 12, 1846, the Erebus and Terror became completely trapped by powerful ice fields off Cape Felix. The British command, raised on the experience of sailing in the more open waters of the Atlantic, failed to grasp the specifics of the local ice dynamics. The ships turned into stationary objects of a forced drift, which continued uninterrupted for 19 months. The complete isolation of the vessels ruled out any possibility of external aid or resupply, initiating a process of irreversible depletion of the expedition's internal resources amidst the progressive physical exhaustion of the men. Within the command structure, this protracted stalemate provoked destructive processes. The constant cold, progressive vitamin deficiency manifesting as scurvy, and lead, which undermined the mental health of officers and sailors, led to rising mortality. On June 11, 1847, the cessation of existence of the expedition's leader, Sir John Franklin, was recorded. Due to the absence of official medical logs, the precise pathological causes of his death cannot be established from the available documents. However, this event became a turning point in the administrative history of the voyage. Command of the expedition passed to Captain Francis Crozier, who was faced with the necessity of a complete revision of the initial operational plan. Crozier, possessing a pragmatic cast of mind, conducted an audit of the food stores and discovered that a significant portion of the canned provisions were entirely unfit for consumption due to putrefactive processes caused by broken seals on the cans. This is corroborated by the discovery of huge mounds of discarded tin cans at subsequent campsites. Realizing that the ships would not be released from the ice prison during the coming season, Crozier began preparations for the evacuation of the personnel. A study of the daily life and disciplinary structure of the expedition during the crisis reveals a striking rigidity of the Royal Navy's institutional standards. Even in their critical position, the officer corps strictly maintained class distinctions and the rituals prescribed by Admiralty instructions. The officers dined separately, using specialized porcelain and silver tableware, although the chemical composition of the rations, containing toxic lead, remained the same for all. A strict class-based routine was maintained in the cabins. Daily inspections were conducted, regular records of meteorological observations were kept, and on Sundays the personnel assembled for mandatory religious services. The system of oaths and loyalty to military duty remained the only social mechanisms preventing immediate disintegration into chaos and anarchy. Communication between the two trapped ships was maintained via strictly regulated signal flags and foot patrols. However, as the coal reserves were exhausted, when the heating system ceased to function and the living quarters became coated in a layer of ice, the physical degradation of the men began to undermine the foundations of executive discipline, laying the groundwork for the subsequent chaos. On the 22nd of April, 1848, Captain Crozier gave the official order to abandon the ships. By this time, the total losses amounted to 9 officers and 15 sailors, indicating an abnormally high mortality rate among the command echelon. This imbalance is explained by the fact that the officers were subjected to increased toxic exposure to lead through specific products, such as canned soups and delicacies, supplied in smaller cans where the contact area between the contents and the solder was significantly higher. The 105 survivors landed on the snowy shore of King William Island, recording their intentions on the fields of form number 209, which was left in a cairn at Cape Victory. Crozier's plan involves an attempt to cover a distance of several hundred miles on foot to Fort Resolution on Great Slave Lake. This plan, from the perspective of modern logistics of extreme marches, was an act of extreme desperation, as the men, afflicted with scurvy and chronic poisoning, did not possess the necessary physical resources to transport heavy army equipment across the rugged Arctic terrain. The technical implementation of the foot march turned into a logistical catastrophe, exacerbated by blind adherence to Admiralty regulations without adaptation to environmental realities. Instead of minimizing the weight of the carried load, Crozier's detachment attempted to transport heavy ship's boats, mounted on massive wooden sledges. The weight of each such structure in a ready state was about 650 kilograms, and moving it required the efforts of dozens of exhausted men. The archaeological audit of the campsite known as Boat Bay, conducted by subsequent search parties, revealed a shocking list of items the sailors dragged across the pressure ridges. Heavy silver spoons and forks with the officers' family crests, heavy books of religious content, silk scarves, spare sets of woolen clothing, soap, hairbrushes, and office writing instruments. This vividly illustrates the institutional pathology. The command staff, until the last moment, tried to maintain the external signs of social identity and Victorian civilized behavior, squandering the remaining muscular energy of the men on moving absolutely useless ballast. The speed of the column's advance dropped to 2 or 3 miles per day, and mortality among the sailors in the hauling harness took on an avalanche-like character. A critical analysis of official correspondence, internal circulars, and the minutes of Admiralty meetings in London from 1846 to 1848 reveals profound bureaucratic inertia and the system's inability to conduct operational risk monitoring. The first official inquiries from relatives of the crew members began arriving at the department at the end of 1846, but ministry officials, including Sir John Barrow, systematically rejected any proposals to organize preventive search parties. The naval leadership relied on paper reports from the supply department, according to which the expedition was provisioned for 3 years, with the possibility of stretching the supplies to 5 years. Acknowledging the need for a rescue operation at an early stage would have meant a public admission of planning errors and the vulnerability of the technologies employed, which was unacceptable for reasons of preserving departmental prestige. As a result of political sabotage and bureaucratic delays, more than 24 months were lost, during which the crews of the Erebus and Terror still retained relative mobility and could have been saved by the timely deployment of search parties from the Bering Strait or Hudson Bay. In 1854, Dr. John Ray, an experienced Arctic explorer and surgeon conducting cartographic work for the Hudson's Bay Company, obtained the first direct documentary and material evidence of the demise of Franklin's party. While in the Pelly Bay area, he made contact with local Inuit, from whom he discovered numerous items of European manufacture: silver cutlery, elements of uniform, chronometers, and navigational instruments. According to Ray's official report, dispatched to the Admiralty, the oral testimonies of the indigenous inhabitants described in detail the discovery in the spring of 1850 of a group of approximately 40 white men moving south along the shore of King William Island. Later that same year, the Inuit discovered more than 30 bodies in the area of the Back River estuary. The most devastating element of John Ray's report, which shattered the public consensus in London, was the detailed description of the condition of the remains. The nature of the damage to the bones and the contents of the camp kettles unequivocally indicated that the surviving crew members, under conditions of extreme starvation, had resorted to the physical dismemberment of their deceased comrades' bodies to prolong their own existence. The publication of John Ray's report provoked powerful ideological opposition from the British establishment, clearly demonstrating the mechanisms of state censorship and the defense of the imperial myth. Victorian society, which had built a cult of martyrdom around Sir John Franklin and his men, was not prepared to accept the fact of the destruction of moral norms among the elite of the Royal Navy. A targeted campaign to discredit Dr. Ray and the testimonies of the Arctic's indigenous population was launched in the press. The writer Charles Dickens, acting as an unofficial mouthpiece for the Admiralty, published a series of articles accusing the Inuit of savagery, cruelty, and a propensity for fabricating false testimony. Dickens put forward an alternative political version, according to which the Eskimos themselves had physically overpowered the weakened English sailors to seize their property, afterwards desecrating the bodies to conceal the traces of the crime. Lady Jane Franklin used her numerous government connections to block the payment of the reward promised by Parliament to John Ray for ascertaining the expedition's fate, demonstrating the state system's readiness to distort historical truth to preserve the empire's political prestige. The historiographical dispute between supporters of the official imperial version and proponents of documentary realism was only conclusively resolved at the end of the 20th century through the application of modern forensic anthropology and osteological analysis. During expeditions led by Professor Owen Beattie and subsequent research by Canadian scientists Anne Keenlyside and polar historian David Woodman, the skeletal remains of no fewer than 19 individuals from the crews were exhumed on King William Island. The results of microscopic and traceological analysis of the bone fragments revealed numerous cut marks, chips, and characteristic thermal damage inflicted by metal tools that were standard issue for British sailors. The nature and location of these marks completely matched the patterns of utilitarian dismemberment of bodies, finally confirming the reliability of the Inuit testimonies recorded by John Ray 130 years prior. It was proven that the process of physical breakdown was accompanied by a complete loss of social structure and a transition to strategies of individual survival during the final stage of the catastrophe, when institutional oaths and class taboos had entirely lost their regulatory power. The discovery of the wrecks of the ships Erebus and Terror, accomplished as part of a large-scale state project by the Canadian government involving the Hydrographic Service and Parks Canada Agency, radically corrected the established chronology of the disaster. In September 2014, using multi-beam sonars in Wilmot and Crampton Bay, the wooden structures of the ship Erebus were recorded. 2 years later, in September 2016, in Terror Bay off the southwestern coast of King William Island, the almost entirely intact hull of the Terror was discovered. The geographical position of the sunken ships completely refutes the classical version based on the Victory Point note. The fact that both ships are dozens of miles south of the point of their official abandonment in April 1848 irrefutably proves that the evacuation to land was not the final point of the expedition's existence. After the failed march on foot, some of the surviving sailors were forced to return on board the ice-bound ships, after which they managed to revive the steam engines or wait for a partial breakup of the ice to take the ships further south in an attempt to break through to the mainland coastline. Modern underwater archaeological research, conducted annually during periods of minimal ice cover, provides a unique body of objective data, free from the subjective distortions of 19th-century memoir literature. The use of remotely operated underwater vehicles allowed access to the interior spaces of the living deck and the wardroom of the Terror. The condition of the interiors demonstrates a high level of organization. All portholes are tightly closed with storm shutters, cabin doors are locked, navigational instruments, chronometers, and sextants are neatly packed in special wooden containers, and ship's logs and officers' personal archives are concentrated in safes and steel boxes. This material evidence completely rules out the version of a panicked flight or the instantaneous destruction of the command structure. Captain Crozier or the officers who succeeded him maintained administrative control and acted in accordance with the strict Admiralty regulations for the conservation of state property until the final weeks of the detachment's existence. Extracting these documents from underwater safes, complicated by extreme temperature conditions and the necessity for immediate chemical preservation of the cellulose, is the main priority of modern researchers, capable of shedding light on the exact dates and names of those who remained on board after April 1848. The official documentary conclusion of Sir John Franklin's Arctic campaign was drawn up in the liquidation statements and accounting reports of the Admiralty, finalized in March 1854. Based on John Ray's report, and due to the complete absence of official news, all 129 crew members were legally declared dead in the line of duty, and their families were paid final salary settlements. The total financial costs borne by the British Crown for preparing the expedition, as well as for funding 30 subsequent state and private search parties, exceeded the astronomical sum for that time of several £100,000 sterling. This entailed large-scale political consequences. Parliament introduced a strict system of independent financial and technical control over the expenditure of funds by the Naval Department. The contract supply system was completely reformed. Stefan Goldner was prosecuted, his factories were closed, and the Commissariat Service introduced a mandatory regulation for the long-term quarantine storage of canned goods before their loading onto military vessels. The impact of the Arctic catastrophe on the era's legal and navigational systems proved to be long-term and comprehensive. The regulations of the Royal Navy acquired a mandatory clause prescribing that all research vessels be supplied with duplicate rescue equipment, including specialized lightweight Eskimo-type sleds, and establishing strict limits on the maximum weight of personal belongings permitted for evacuation. A paradoxical geopolitical consequence of the expedition's demise was the unprecedented large-scale mapping of the Canadian polar archipelago. Search parties, moving along various routes for more than a decade, discovered, charted, and described thousands of miles of unexplored coastline, effectively completing the discovery of the Northwest Passage, for the cartographic recording of which the Empire had paid with the lives of 2 crews. The extensive archives of these search missions, containing thousands of reports, ship logs, cartographic sketches, and transcripts of interviews with local inhabitants, are now concentrated in the holdings of the National Maritime Museum in Greenwich and the National Archives of Canada in Ottawa. serving as the fundamental basis for modern historical science, studying the mechanisms of operation and the limits of endurance of state power in the 19th century.